You have never been taught what the second jhana actually is. Here is a sentence from the Pāli Canon. It is one of the most repeated sentences in all of the Buddhist scriptures. The Buddha says it over and over, in the Majjhima Nikaya, in the Anguttara Nikaya, in the Daya Nikaya, in the Samyutta Nikaya. Thousands of monks memorized it by heart. Millions of meditators across 15 centuries have studied it, chanted it, contemplated it. Hundreds of scholars have published analyses of it, and almost none of them are teaching it correctly. That sentence is the description of the second jhana. And today, using only the Pāli Canon itself, no commentaries, no modern interpretations, no tradition-specific overlays, we are going to find out what it actually says. Because what it says is not what you think. And the difference, if you are a meditator, changes everything. Let me tell you why this matters more than most Dhamma topics. The jhanas are not abstract philosophy. In the Pāli Canon, the Buddha describes them as the direct path to liberation. He calls them the footsteps of the Tathagata. He says, over and over, that a meditator who wants to develop samadhi, right concentration, the eighth factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, must develop the four jhanas. In the Samanaphala Sutta, the second sutta of the Daya Nikaya, the Buddha gives a comprehensive account of the path to liberation. And the jhanas are not optional extras or advanced electives. They are the beating heart of the journey. Now here is where it gets critical. If you misunderstand what the second jhana is, you will pursue the wrong thing. You may sit for years, for decades, practicing something that the Buddha never described. You may never recognize the second jhana when it actually arises, because you have been told to look for something entirely different. I am not being dramatic. This is a practical problem with practical consequences. Meditators have reported practicing for 20, 30 years under a particular model of the jhanas, and then encountering a different translation of the suttas and realizing that what they had been seeking was a construction that does not appear in the canon. And the root of this confusion goes back to a very specific moment in Buddhist history. But before I tell you what that moment is, I want to show you exactly what the canon says. I want the evidence on the table before we analyze where things went wrong. The hidden problem has a name and a date. It happened in the 5th century CE, roughly 900 to 1000 years after the Buddha's passing. A Theravada scholar monk named Buddhaghosa, writing most likely at the great monastery of Mahavihara in Anuradhapura, Sri Lanka, composed a monumental and comprehensive commentary called the Visuddhimagga, the Path of Purification. Now, I want to be very clear about something. The Visuddhimagga is a genuinely extraordinary work. It is meticulous, comprehensive, and represents a stunning achievement of systematic Buddhist scholarship. I am not dismissing it. I am not suggesting it has no value. It has enormous value, but Buddhaghosa was a commentator. He was interpreting the suttas, not recording the Buddha's words. And when it came to the jhanas, particularly the second jhana, he made interpretive choices. Choices that departed meaningfully from what the Nikāyas actually say. Here is the core issue, stated as simply as possible. The Visuddhimagga imposes a highly technical, Abhidharma-derived framework onto the jhana descriptions. It specifies things about the jhanas, particularly about how concentrated and how exclusive and how object-locked the jhana state must be, that the suttas simply do not say. The suttas do not say these things. The commentary adds them, and because the Visuddhimagga became the dominant teaching manual for Theravada Buddhism across 15 centuries, in Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, those additions became the default understanding. Even for practitioners who had never read the Visuddhimagga, the model filtered down through teachers, through traditions, through lineages, until it became invisible, just assumed to be what the suttas say. The commentary colonized the canon. But here is the crucial point, the point that makes this video worth your time. The original canon is still there. The suttas are still there, unchanged, available, and when you read them, carefully, directly, without the commentary overlay, the second jhana looks meaningfully different from what most meditators have been taught. So let's open the canon. Here is the Pāli formula for the second jhana, as it appears identically, word for word, in the Majjhima Nikaya, the Anguttara Nikaya, the Daya Nikaya, and the Samyutta Nikaya. This formula is so consistent across the canon that its repetition itself is a form of emphasis. The Buddha, or his close disciples preserving his words, wanted this said exactly this way, over and over. Here it is, Vitakka-Vicārānaṃ Vūpasamā, with the stilling of directed thought and evaluation. Ajjhattaṃ Sampasādanaṃ, internal confidence. internal serenity. Cetaso ekodibhāvaṃ, the unification of mind, the singleness of mind. Vitakka-Vicārānaṃ, without directed thought, without evaluation. Samādhijaṃ Pīti-Sukhaṃ, the rapture and pleasure born of composure. Dutiyam jhānam Vūpasamā viharati, one enters and dwells in the second jhana. Now, I need you to stop and look at that formula carefully. Because there is something hiding in plain sight. Most teachings on the second jhana focus on what drops out, vitakka and vicāra, directed thought and evaluation, they fall away. That is the story we are usually told. The first jhana has thinking, the second jhana doesn't. That is the primary description most meditators receive. But look at what appears. Look at the specific feature the formula emphasizes with the word Ajjhattaṃ, meaning internal. Internal confidence. Ajjhattaṃ sampasadanaṃ. This is the feature that most accounts of the second jhana completely skip over. They mention it briefly, if at all, and then move past it. And it is not a minor detail. It is a defining characteristic. The formula gives it a dedicated line. And we need to understand exactly what it means, because when we do, the entire picture of the second jhana transforms. Let's investigate each component of the formula systematically, the way a careful textual scholar would approach a primary source. First, Vitakka-Vicārānaṃ Vūpasamā, with the stilling of directed thought and evaluation. Vitakka means directed thought, the initial application and direction of the mind toward an object. The mind reaches toward something. Vicāra means evaluation, the sustained examination, the attending to, the exploring of that object. Together, Vitakka and Vicāra represent the mind's active cognitive engagement, thinking towards something and examining that something. In the first jhana, both are present. The mind is still engaging in this active, applied way, still directing, still examining. This is part of what makes the first jhana accessible. There is still cognition happening in a recognizable form. In the second jhana, they still. And the specific word the canon uses for this stilling is crucial, Vūpasamā. This word means settling, subsiding, calming, an organic, natural cessation. Think of a river current that gradually slows and quiets as it enters a still lake. The current does not stop because a dam was built, it stops because the conditions changed and the settling happened naturally. This is the sense of Vūpasamā. It is not forced suppression. It is not white-knuckled concentration driving out thought. It is the natural organic subsiding of thought activity when the mind has been sufficiently prepared through the first jhana. This distinction between natural stilling and forced suppression is not a minor nuance. It has direct implications for how you practice. Second, Ajjhattaṃ sampasadanaṃ, internal confidence, internal serenity. This is the term that most accounts of the second jhana move past too quickly. Let's give it the full attention it deserves. The word sampasadana derives from the Pāli root prasada, which carries a cluster of related meanings: clarity, purity, luminosity, serenity, and trust. It is the quality of a mind that has become transparent to itself, clear the way still water is clear. Settled, luminous, uncontracted. The Pāli English Dictionary of the Pāli Text Society confirms, prasada carries the sense of lucidity, clearness of mind, faith, confidence. Bhikkhu Bodhi translates sampasadana as internal confidence. Thanissaro Bhikkhu renders it as internal assurance. Both translators are reaching for the same quality, a deep, non-conceptual settledness of the mind in itself. And then there is the qualifier Ajjhattaṃ, meaning internal, inward. This qualifier is doing important work. The confidence is not about a doctrine, not about a teacher's endorsement, not about an external object. It is an internal quality of the mind itself. The mind has become confident in its own awareness, at rest in its own nature, settled in its own ground. When you put the two words together, Ajjhattaṃ sampasadanaṃ, you get an inward, self-luminous quality of settled confidence that has arisen within the mind's own field. This is the defining feature of the second jhana that differentiates it from the first. And this is precisely what most teachings on the second jhana fail to name, describe, or help meditators recognize. Third, Cetaso ekodibhāvaṃ, the unification of mind. Ekodibhava is a compound. Ekodi means unified, gathered into one, having one point of arrival, and bhava means becoming, state of being, quality. Together, the state of being gathered and unified. Now here is an important distinction that often gets flattened in translation. Ekodi is not simply one-pointed, in the sense of being narrowed down to a pinpoint. The sense in Pāli usage across the Nikāyas is of being gathered, of many streams coming together into one unified flow. The mind is not squeezed. It is unified. It is made whole. This is a crucial distinction because the Visuddhimagga model emphasizes a quality of narrowness, extreme concentration focused on a small, specific, refined object. The Nikāya formula describes something qualitatively different, a mind that has become unified, whole, gathered into itself. Wholeness is not narrowness. A mind gathered into unity feels different from a mind squeezed into a point. Cetaso is the genitive of citta, ceto, the mind, the heart-mind. The unification is of the mind itself, not of the object being observed, but of the observing mind. Fourth, Samādhijaṃ Pīti-Sukhaṃ, rapture and pleasure born of composure. Here the source of pīti, rapture, enthusiastic joy, and sukha, pleasure, ease, happiness, has changed significantly from the first jhana. In the first jhana, the formula uses the phrase Vitakka-Vicārānaṃ Pīti-Sukhaṃ, rapture and pleasure born of viveka, born of seclusion, born of disengagement from sensual engagement. The withdrawal from sensual inputs is the generative source. In the second jhana, the source phrase becomes samadhijaṃ, born of samadhi, born of composure, born of the collected state itself. The joy and pleasure are no longer dependent on withdrawal from something external. They arise from the inherent quality of the samadhi. The composure itself is generative. This is a phenomenologically significant shift. The pleasure has become self-sustaining, arising not because you successfully excluded something, but because the nature of this collected state produces joy as its natural expression. The stillness is itself pleasurable. The unification is itself rapturous. The joy is intrinsic to the composure, not dependent on what the composure excludes. When you stand back and see these four elements together, the organic stilling of thought, the arising of internal confidence, the unification of mind into wholeness, and the joy born of composure itself, you see a coherent, specific, identifiable state described with remarkable precision. And it is not what most meditators have been trained to look for. Now here is the revelation. Most teachings on the second jhana, whether you encountered them in a retreat center, in a modern meditation book, or from a teacher in the theravada tradition, say something broadly like this: in the second jhana, the mind becomes extremely concentrated, very refined, deeply absorbed. The object of meditation becomes clearer and the state becomes more exclusive, more locked in, more narrow, more cut off from the ordinary cognitive world. That description sounds reasonable. It sounds like a deeper, more intense version of concentration. And it is not entirely wrong. There is clearly something happening at the level of concentration. But here is what it is missing. Here is what it erases. The suttas do not use the word exclusive. They do not say the object becomes narrow or becomes a pinpoint. They do not describe the state as one of extreme cognitive suppression. The Visuddhimagga says these things. The Abhidharma framework implies them. But the suttas, the Nikāyas themselves, do not say them. Look instead at what the suttas do say. They say the second jhana is characterized by Ajjhattaṃ sampasadanaṃ, internal confidence. This is not the language of narrowing. This is not the language of suppression or restriction. It is the language of deepening trust, of settledness, of a luminous clarity that is not exclusive but is self-sufficient. The mind is confident in its own awareness, at rest in its own nature, not leaning on directed thought to sustain itself. And Cetaso Ekodibhāvaṃ, unification of mind, is not the mind reduced to a point. It is the mind gathered into wholeness. This shifts the entire quality of what you are looking for in meditation. Instead of pursuing a state of extreme narrowness, of being locked onto a tiny, bright, precisely maintained point of concentration that requires highly specific, technically demanding conditions to sustain, what the Nikāya formula actually describes is something that feels qualitatively different. A mind that has become fully gathered, internally confident, quiet in a way that is not deprived but full, sustained by a joy that arises from the composure itself, not from a successfully maintained object. The shift from first to second jhana, according to the suttas, is not a shift from concentrated to extremely concentrated. It is not a quantitative increase. It is a qualitative transformation, a shift in the fundamental relationship between the mind and awareness itself. The mind moves from a state of still engaging, still directing, still applying, the active cognitive posture of the first jhana, to a state of settled non-engagement. Not emptiness, not blank absorption, but a settled, confident, unified wholeness that is self-sustaining and self-luminous. The thoughts have stilled, the internal confidence has arisen, the mind is unified, and rapture and pleasure sustain it, not as inputs from outside, but as the natural expression of what the composure itself is. That is the second jhana according to the Nikāyas. And it is available, right now, to any meditator who develops the right conditions. Sutta-based proof. Let me give you 3 passages of sutta-based evidence, 3 specific suttas that corroborate and triangulate everything I have described. First, the Kulavadala Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 44. In this sutta, the Bhikkhuni Dharmadina is asked a series of precise questions about meditative states. One question is, where do Vitakka and Vicara cease? Her answer is precise. They cease in the second jhana, not in the third, not in some specially refined version of the first jhana. In the second jhana, full stop. And notice the framing of the question itself. The questioner asks specifically about the cessation of applied and exploratory thought, not about concentration becoming narrow, not about absorption becoming extreme. The entire frame of the question confirms that the defining mark of the second jhana is the settling of Vitakka-Vicara, exactly as the formula states, and no more than that. Second, the Samanaphala Sutta, Dien 2, and its parallels throughout the Majjhima Nikaya. The Buddha consistently uses the 4 jhanas as the benchmark and foundation of developed concentration, samadhi, across dozens of suttas. And the language he uses consistently is, upasampada viharati, enters and dwells. Enters and dwells. This phrasing matters. Viharati, to dwell, implies a sustainable, livable state, not a fragile, hair-trigger, technically extreme state that collapses at the sound of a footstep or the slight shift of body weight. Not a state accessible only under laboratory conditions of silence and perfect retreat. A state one enters and dwells in. The dwelling language is the canon's signal that these states, while refined, are robust and genuine, not performance states requiring heroic effort to maintain millisecond by millisecond. Third, the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Fours, and 4.41, the Samadhi Sutta. Here the Buddha describes 4 kinds of concentration that are to be developed. The second kind he describes as Samādhijaṃ Sappatikkam, concentration with rapture, concentration that is suffused with and characterized by pīti. He describes this as wholesome, as to be developed, as part of the path. The key word is Sappatikkam, with rapture, accompanied by rapture, full of rapture. This is not the language of extreme suppressive concentration. This is the language of a state that is full enough, spacious enough, suffused enough, to sustain rapture as an ongoing, characteristic quality. The rapture is not a side effect, it is one of the defining qualities that the Buddha names in how he categorizes this concentration. 3 suttas. 1 coherent picture. The same second jhana emerges from each, a state characterized by the natural settling of directed thought, the arising of internal confidence, a unification of mind that is gathered and whole, and rapture that is born of and sustained by the composure itself. This is the Nikaya description. This is what the canon says. Verifiable, cross-checkable, available to anyone who opens the texts.
So what does all of this mean for your actual meditation practice? Let's make this concrete. If you have been pursuing the second jhana as a state of extreme, exclusive concentration, a state where awareness is deliberately narrowed to a bright and precisely maintained point, where everything peripheral has been suppressed, where the conditions are highly technical and fragile, you may have been pursuing something the suttas do not describe. And you may have walked past the door of the second jhana many times without recognizing it because you were looking for the wrong thing. Here are 3 practical implications drawn directly from the Nikaya description. Practical implication. 1. Don't look for narrowness. Look for settledness. The second jhana arises when directed, thought genuinely settles, not when it is forcibly excluded or white-knuckled into submission. Vūpasamā means organic subsiding. You cannot manufacture this. You cannot will it into existence. What you can do is create the conditions through deep, genuine, sustained engagement in the first jhana, and then allow the settling to happen. The settling is not your doing. It is the natural consequence of sufficiently established conditions. The practical instruction this generates: if you find yourself effortfully suppressing thought in order to arrive at the second jhana, you are almost certainly in the wrong approach. The path is deeper engagement with the quality of the first jhana, not harder exclusion. Practical implication. 2. Recognize the signature quality. Internal confidence. Ajjhattaṃ sampasadanaṃ is the hallmark. It is the diagnostic marker. And it is the one that most meditation instruction never describes clearly, which means meditators cannot recognize it when it arises. So what does it feel like? Based on the etymology and the context of the formula, Ajjhattaṃ sampasadanaṃ is a quality of settled clarity in the mind itself, not excitement, not intensity, not the buzzing aliveness of first jhana rapture. It is a clear, self-sufficient quality. The mind feels grounded in its own awareness. At home. Not reaching toward anything, not withdrawing from anything. Simply resting in itself with a quality of transparent confidence. When this quality is present, when there is this inward settledness, this luminous, unreaching quality, you are at the threshold of, or within, the second jhana. Learn to recognize this quality. It is more subtle than the vitality of the first jhana, but it is unmistakable once you have seen it clearly. Practical implication. 3. Understand that the rapture arises from composure, not from input. In the second jhana, piti and sukha are self-sustaining. They arise from the quality of the collected state itself. This means you are not waiting for the meditation object to provide pleasant sensations. You are not mining the breath or the sensation for something pleasurable. The composure itself is the source. The gathered wholeness generates its own joy. This is a fundamentally different relationship to what you are doing in meditation. You move from a model of seeking, reaching for pleasant meditative experience, to a model of being. The composure is generative in itself, and your task is simply to remain in it. These 3 shifts, from narrowing to settledness, from looking for an external confirmation to recognizing an internal quality, from seeking input to resting in composure, are not small adjustments. For many meditators, they represent a complete reorientation of practice, and they follow directly and necessarily from what the Nikāyas actually say.
Final payoff. Here is the final payoff. We began this video with a statement: you have never been taught what the second jhana actually is. I want to close that loop completely. What the second jhana actually is, according to the Pāli Canon, as it appears identically across the 4 Nikāyas, is this. It is a state in which directed thought and evaluation have organically stilled, not because they were driven out, but because the conditions no longer sustained them. In which the mind has developed a quality of internal confidence, Ajjhattaṃ sampasadanaṃ, a luminous, settled, self-sufficient trust in its own awareness. In which the mind is not narrowed to a point but unified into wholeness, gathered, complete, not leaning. And in which rapture and pleasure arise, not from external input, not from a successfully maintained technical object, not from a demanding and fragile concentration state, but from the inherent quality of the composure itself. This is not a minor or abstract distinction. The Buddha described this state as part of the direct path to liberation. He described it as the footstep of the Tathagata. He described it as essential to samma samadhi, right concentration, the 8th factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. And the genuinely important good news is this: the Nikāya description of the second jhana is less exclusive and more accessible than the commentary-derived model that most practitioners have been working from. The canon does not describe a state accessible only to those with near-superhuman powers of concentration, practicing under perfectly controlled retreat conditions, maintaining an impossibly narrow focus on a microscopic meditation object. That description, however venerable the tradition it comes from, is not in the Nikāyas. What the Nikāyas describe is a state accessible to any meditator who develops the right conditions. Deep, genuine engagement in the first jhana. Patient, allowing, non-forcing attention as directed thought naturally stills. Recognition of the internal confidence that arises as the mind settles into its own ground. And then, simply dwelling there. Upasampada viharati. The second jhana is not a distant mountain. According to the Nikāyas, it is the next step. And now you know what to look for. Strong call to action. If this changed how you understand the jhanas, share it. Not to promote a channel, but because there are serious meditators who have been looking for exactly this clarity for years. People who have been practicing sincerely and deserving to practice with accurate understanding of what the Buddha actually taught. The links in the description will take you directly to the sutta passages we studied today, the Kulavadala Sutta at MN 44, the Samadhi Sutta at N 4.41, and the full jhana sequences from DN 2 and MN 36. Read them yourself. Don't take my word for it. Go directly to the canon. That is always the right move. And if you want to understand how the first jhana actually leads into the second, what the specific conditions are that allow that transition to happen naturally, that is the next video in this series. Because the second jhana doesn't arise in isolation, it arises from something specific. And that something, according to the Nikāyas, is also not what most people think. Subscribe to find out what it is. The canon is waiting. Go read it.